Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Your Legislators, a production of KRWG Public Media. Your Legislators is a public service program providing our viewing audience in southern New Mexico the opportunity to hear about important legislative issues directly from their elected representatives in Santa Fe.
Hello and welcome to Your Legislators. I'm Anthony Moreno. On this program, we speak with lawmakers from our viewing and listening area during the legislative session in New Mexico. Joining us this week is Republican State Representative Rebecca Dow, who represents District 38 in our state, which covers areas within Sierra, Grant, and Hidalgo counties. Representative Dow is a member of the House Commerce and Economic Development Committee as well as the Education Committee. Please welcome State Representative Rebecca Dow, who joins us now from the Roundhouse Studios in Santa Fe. Thank you so much for joining us, Representative Dow.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's always great to connect with folks from back home down in southern New Mexico, so thank you for the opportunity.
So the 30-day legislative session has kicked off. What are your thoughts right now on how the session is going so far?
Well, it is a whirlwind. There are lots of bills being introduced, hearing lots of messages given by the governor. So it should be not only a lot of activity around the budget, but also around some of the initiatives that representatives from across the state have brought that the governor has given a message to. So the budget, of course, we have another surplus, and so there's lots of activity on how that could be spent.
So what are your thoughts on, with the budget, how it could really help out your district and the rest of the state? What are some of the most pressing issues you think really need to be addressed?
Well, as far as pressing issues that could be direct expenditures to my district, I think a lot of them are more around reforms to bills and reforms to rules and regulations that create barriers to economic development in my district. But things that I am advocating for are things like funds to, it's mostly rural issues, so it's not just my district, but all of rural New Mexico. Funds for veteran services, outreach officers throughout rural New Mexico. Grant County, for example, has 3,500 veterans, and we are sharing one veteran service officer with a 6-county area that's housed in Las Cruces, and that person has to travel great distances all throughout my district, but also Luna County and all the way to Catron County. So thousands and thousands of veterans relying on one person who also is responsible for Doñana County. So there's one. Our senior mill sites throughout rural New Mexico are really in a difficult situation. They're reimbursed by mill that they serve, but because they have fewer mills to serve, they have less operating budgets for their fixed costs. And we almost lost the senior mill site in Catron County, and this mill site in Hidalgo County has already gone away. Grant County is now providing delivery of mills to try to keep seniors fed in Hidalgo County. Sierra County is hanging on by a thread, and we've got to make investments in our seniors. Both those issues are around seniors, and what I'm seeing is these are our seniors. They've paid in their entire lives. They've served in the military. They've contributed and paid their taxes. And now in their senior years, we expect them to pay copays on their health care. They're paying copays on their prescriptions. They're having difficulty accessing health services. And we're even taxing their Social Security income. So I'm also sponsoring a bill to eliminate the tax on seniors' income.
Yeah.
Also in rural New Mexico. Oh, go ahead.
Let's talk about those, because you brought up some pretty important issues right there that a lot of folks are concerned about. Now, you mentioned there's only one veteran services officer in your district, and also has to cover parts of Doñana County as well. Now, I'd like to hear, what are you proposing? How should that number be increased? I mean, how many officers do you propose?
Yeah, well, I don't think we're going to reach what we need. I worked in the interim with the director, our Secretary of Veteran Services, who was also looking at adding positions for other, filling vacancies for other positions. So when I saw that the service outreach coordinators did not reach her budget, I proposed 4 additional veteran service officers throughout the state. So that would put one down in southern New Mexico. And also, I mean, there are some districts that are far, far bigger than mine. So we need some also in northern New Mexico. We have a lot of veterans in our native communities, and their distances to access services are even greater than our neck of the woods down in, Las Cruces it's 2 hours for someone to travel from Silver City to Cruces to meet with a service outreach coordinator, and that is too far in my opinion. So my bill adds a $200,000 appropriation and 4 officers throughout the state. It allows the Secretary of Veteran Services to decide where those officers are placed.
Now, you brought up the need to increase funding to help out senior meals, getting food, nutritious food to seniors in our area who may not be able to obtain that on their own. Now,
That's right.
obviously the growing population, folks in our state are growing in age, our population is getting older. Now, you brought up one key piece of legislation that some folks have been talking about during this legislative session, and that is the Social Security income tax exemption law. Now, I'd like to hear your thoughts on why you feel this really needs to be enacted and proposed, and repealing the state tax on Social Security.
Well, some people are proposing the repeal of the Social Security income tax for our seniors as an economic opportunity, and I believe that is one piece of that. So a senior who's deciding where they're going to retire can look at New Mexico, and a lot of these people come with a retirement check. They've retired from a corporation, they have a check in the mail, they have a third-party insurance, they're never going to use Medicare, and so these folks are coming to our state with money to spend. They come with a recreational vehicle, they come with their boats, they fish on our lakes, they visit our state parks, and we want to attract them. So that's the economic driver behind it. And the other side of it is just the disparity in what our seniors who are living solely on their Social Security income, they cannot afford to live. So they are trying to figure out how to take this $600 a month Social Security income that the government promised them would be their retirement, and trying to figure out how they're supposed to live on that and feed themselves, pay for their prescriptions, pay for their health care. They're barely getting by. And so when we raise things like, we raise the minimum wage, we raise the cost of services to those seniors, there's an incremental increase on cost on all these things, and their income is not going up. And so we've got to relieve the Social Security tax just to help them get by.
Now, is there any concern about how folks can maybe get around this legislation? I mean, are there loopholes in the current system to where people can avoid paying a tax perhaps on Social Security?
What they do is their primary residence is in another state, and then they may vacation or spend part-time here. I mean, I don't know of a way around this. If someone's primary residency is New Mexico and they live here, we tax their income.
Yeah.
And so it's not a good economic driver for our state, but it's even harder on those low income. And you mentioned that this is a growing population. By 2030, the retired population, seniors, will be the largest population in the United States for the first time in our nation's history. And they're calling that a silver tsunami. And we need to address food security, we need to address housing, we don't have enough housing. But we're also poised, I mean, this is our most vulnerable population, those seniors who are low income, those that are shut-ins, those that have multiple disabilities, they're struggling. But it's also an economic opportunity for attracting those baby boomers and giving them a reason to come and live in our state. We've got the climate, we've got the environment, but we don't have tax policy that attracts seniors.
Now, you mentioned the so-called senior silver tsunami.
Yeah.
That is something that you don't hear a lot of people talking about in a mainstream conversation about policy in our state. We held a call-in show recently on this issue of repealing the state tax on Social Security. And we had somebody call in who was 50 years old, was working 2 jobs, and couldn't afford to even put enough away towards retirement. Do you think that this could be a bigger issue than we're really paying attention to right now?
It is a huge issue, and none of these fixes are simple. Without a comprehensive tax reform, it's going to be difficult to move our state forward so that those who are wage earners can invest, and that those who are seniors are not having to contribute anymore. I mean, they've done their part, they've contributed, and it's a much bigger picture. You know, you brought up wage earners, and here in New Mexico, what has been shocking to me and that I didn't know until I became a lawmaker was that seniors are paying copays on their insurance, they're paying copays on their prescriptions, they're paying copays on their housing, yet an able-bodied single person with no dependents and no barriers to the workforce can receive things completely free. And that disparity is costing dollars we're looking to enhance tax revenues. We're trying to find more money. Even in a $1 billion surplus, we're sweeping reserves, we're increasing taxes. And I think part of that reform is saying, where are the able-bodied workforce that can contribute, and why are they getting things for free when we have young families who have children with special needs? Those are our vulnerable populations. And then we have our seniors that I consider vulnerable, who are expected to contribute.
Now, I want to talk with you about an issue you did bring up, and that was food insecurity in the state. Now, obviously, we know that's an issue in the state. I spoke with the CEO and president of Roadrunner Food Bank not too long ago about her concerns about what's happening at the federal level. Now, there's been proposals by the Trump administration about making changes to the temporary assistance program in our country, and how some folks are concerned that that could impact SNAP, which could impact food agencies in our state. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, in the food security area, I am trying to focus on how we can partner with the USDA programs that do exist and make sure any additional state dollars that we're contributing will strengthen and support those healthy foods and the sustainability. And I'm more concerned not with the federal regulations, but with the state regulations. So we are allowing farm to table to be a program in public schools. We do not have a farm to table regulation around child care centers. We do not have a farm to table around senior centers. And the reason why that is so important is because we also have an aging farming population. Our ag producers are aging. And in order to attract new farmers, we have people who are starting small farms or selling in farmers markets. But if we were to expand what Farm to Table could do, it would have, again, a twofold impact. First would be economic. Those farmers who do not have enough produce to sell to a public school do have enough produce to supply senior meal sites and child care centers. Well, those senior meal sites, and so that would help the farmer become sustainable and fully utilize their crop. But it would also help our senior sites and our child care centers get more fresh produce. That's just a simple rule change in New Mexico, because right now the incentive for Farm to Table is only for public schools.
Yeah, I talked to some of these agricultural producers in our state, and you know, not only is their population aging, but so is their workforce that is working with them to produce this food. Any thoughts on how we can address that issue?
Well, as far as we are getting a lot of new farmers, and those folks who are working with ag and coming in and utilizing some of our economic initiatives, a lot of them are farmers. And right now, because they're small and they don't have the volume that's needed to be in, box stores and, commercial stores or to sell to schools, they're selling in farmers markets. And yet we have barriers there too. So there's always these barriers and rules and regs that we have to look at, and we've compounded the problem. And what I want to do is remove those barriers. And one would be a cottage industry bill that allows small producers to sell at a farmer's market and to be able to make granola or breads or tortillas or whatever it is that they're selling in what may not be a fully commercial kitchen. So they could be able to go, lots of states are doing this, and where small producers are able to work with the environment department, work with the ag department, and make sure that the food that they're producing is safe, but that they can sell it on a smaller scale. Just this year in my district, I had a small dairy producer go out of business. We have people who are trying to make a go of it that cannot sell at a farmer's market. They're trying to prepare bizcochitos or whatever their family traditional recipe is, and we've created barriers to them being able to start their business. So they may be able to get J-tip dollars, or they may be able to get LIDA dollars, but it has to go to a commercial kitchen. And why are we not giving a waiver? We're never going to have enough money to fully fund our needs, so let's be strategic with the dollars we spend. And as far as there's lots of barriers, and it may be a state rule and reg, it might be a federal rule and reg.
Now, you brought up so many issues here in addressing the need to help fund those issues, and we've also talked about the need to fund and take care of veterans and seniors in our state. And you addressed the issue of really focusing on taxes in New Mexico, the tax policy. I mean, are there some industries that maybe we shouldn't be giving so many incentives to maybe address some of these issues that you've been talking about already? Because we know that some
there's no
some
question.
incentives, like what are they?
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
There's no question. I mean, we rank, I think in the nation, they say we have the 7th most complicated tax code. And it's really the result, if anybody's spent any time in Santa Fe, you learn really quickly that lobbyists get stuff done. So, there's not anybody lobbying for, not as many people lobbying for seniors as someone who comes in with high power dollars from out of state to push a particular initiative. That the film tax credit would be an example. So
tell me about that. What exactly about that film tax credit do you think that needs to be really looked at?
Well, I mean, if I would have picked an industry winner or loser, I'm focused on rural New Mexico, I would have picked the healthcare industry. We have a shortage of social workers, nurses, behavioral health, mental health providers. Our hospitals are hanging on by a thread in rural New Mexico. So if I was going to pick winners or losers as a rural representative, I would have given a tax incentive to our healthcare industry and watch healthcare and those support services thrive throughout the state. My issue with the film tax credit is most of those dollars stay in the metropolitan area, and many of the tax credits do, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's the film tax credit, whether it's any of these carve-outs, the dollars stay in the metropolitan area, and we keep growing the disparity in rural New Mexico. So I'm looking for incentives that help statewide. And it's not that I'm necessarily opposed to the film tax credit. We are basically competing with other states to who can give the biggest tax credit to billionaires. And yes, it is creating jobs. Yes, it is trickling down into the communities. But on average, I think if I remember the figures right, we have about 3,000 people working in the film industry. And if you take the annual tax credit, we're supplementing their wage by $22,000 a year. So, I mean, we're competing with other states to bring that in. I wish it was for an industry that had a statewide impact.
Well, the governor and the state, I mean, they removed the cap recently and made it even higher. So, I mean, what were your thoughts on that?
Well, again, it's difficult to vote for a tax credit that chooses industries, pits industries over other industries. It's why we have the tax code we have. And, the initiatives that I've seen that I can support are from think tanks that are tax policy people here in our state and throughout the nation. And they're endorsed by our municipalities, our cities, and our counties, saying we've got to cut out all those loopholes. We've got to take a really hard look at comprehensive tax reform so that we can lower the tax rate for everyone. And I think that the figure they're looking for is 2.5% to 3% on everything, rather than some people paying nothing and other. I mean, we have communities whose local taxes are pushing 10% because they have no other way to generate revenue because there are so many carve-outs.
Now, another issue that was proposed before the legislative session was free tuition in New Mexico. Obviously, the governor wanted to really double down on this and stress that. I'd like to hear your thoughts on, do you support that? And tell me more, if so, why?
Yeah.
If not, why?
I keep hearing the term moonshot. We're going to take a moonshot. We're going to take a moonshot. And, I would rather be strategic and take a laser target and go straight where the initiatives can have the greatest impact. So does that look like free college for all? I think my answer would be no. My son earlier this year, he and his wife just moved to Spokane, Washington, because they couldn't make their financial goals a reality with his degree in New Mexico. So I don't want to see students leaving our state. So how would I do an opportunity scholarship? How would I do any of the scholarships? I believe they should all be tied to high demand jobs. So those would be jobs that we need right here in New Mexico. When we're talking about educational opportunities, what is our goal? Is it to have more people graduating? Is it to grow the workforce? Is it to build capacity where we need it throughout our state? So free college is not strategic enough for me. One, these are all wage earner dollars, and we've got to treat them like it's our own budget. So I wouldn't go down to the community and just start handing out money. I would look strategically when I give, and with my personal funds, and I think we should do the same with taxpayer dollars. So target the jobs that are high need, have a obligation in there to work within the state or repay your debt. So for example, if we give someone a scholarship to be an engineer at New Mexico Tech, and they have to work in New Mexico for 2 years or repay that loan, great. If they get a Department of Defense job and they leave the state, then they should reimburse the state. Because in my opinion, we're trying to grow the workforce, we're trying to keep our best and brightest in New Mexico, and we're trying to be strategic about those investments.
Now, another issue, obviously, folks are trying to address early childhood education in New Mexico. There is the creation of the new department, Early Childhood Education and Care Department. Now, you have a background in providing early childhood care in your area where you reside. I'd like to hear a little bit more on what you think of the new department. Do you feel that it is going along, the creation of it and the staffing of it is going as planned?
I've been really, I did vote for the new department, although I think we had in place in statute and we had through the Children's Cabinet the ability to do every single thing that this new cabinet is tasked with doing. But I did support it because it seems to be where people think intentionality will finally occur. And so now we're looking at this trust fund that would start creating reoccurring revenue, not just from the general operating budget, but from investments that we make in early childhood. I think that's important. What I am concerned about, and I'm growing more and more concerned about, is that we are focusing on these moonshots. Again, we're going to do universal childcare, universal pre-K, and then we hear criticisms when the outcomes are declining. So the argument for high quality early childhood is a 30-year-old argument, and these historical studies targeted low-income at-risk kids. And all the research tells us the best place for a child is in a healthy home. That is not the norm in New Mexico, and so the studies showed that as we made intentional investments with low-income at-risk kids, and we made sure they were in a quality setting with qualified workforce, that those children saw an 11% rate of return. They went to school ready, and they were more likely than their at-risk peers to be proficient in reading by 3rd grade. However, now we are just funding slots. So for example, last year, we grew the demand for the early childhood workforce. In a year of shortage, we don't have enough teachers, we don't have enough social workers, we don't have enough qualified early childhood workers. We grew slots for home visiting and pre-K by over 1,200 workers that there is no qualified workforce. So then we had to give waivers. We've got long-term subs teaching pre-K classrooms last year. We've absolutely decimated the workforce in Head Start and child care centers for universal programs. And what does that mean? That means Head Start, child care programs, those programs that are targeting the families who need the most help, they are losing their qualified workforce to universal programs that pay a higher wage in PED and in CYFD. If you want to be a home visitor or a pre-K provider or a pre-K teacher, you make double, plus you get benefits and you get retirement. So all those programs that serve the most at-risk families, where we really need to provide that safety net, those workers have left those programs. And now those families who are low income they're seeing a decline in the quality of their programming. Yet, a middle and upper income family, I had a child care provider call me this morning. She does New Mexico pre-K through the CYFD department. She has a bus driver that is picking up a pre-K child at a $500,000 home in Farmington. And she's saying, this is not right because the opportunity gap is growing between those who have and those who have not. The universal programs are being accessed by healthy families and affluent families, while those families who really need the safety net of full day year-round care while they work and go to school, we are undermining, supplanting, and actually closing their programs. So although I'm excited about everyone seeing the value of high quality early childhood, I'm very concerned that we're throwing money just very unintentionally how we're spending the dollars. And we're actually harming children, especially those in child protective services, those in kinship guardianship care, those who qualify for federal programs are getting less and less quality.
Now, I want to talk with you about an issue that is going to gain a lot of attention in Santa Fe, obviously, this week that we're taping this episode, and that is the issue of the proposed so-called red flag laws in New Mexico. Now, I know there's been some folks who have been outspoken in law enforcement about this issue on both sides, really, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on this legislation, and do you support it? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, so we take two pledges each year when we're elected. So every other year we raise our right hand and we swear first to uphold the Constitution of the United States, secondly to uphold the Constitution of the state of New Mexico. Both of those constitutions have very strong protections that law-abiding citizens have the right to bear arms. So my litmus test for a gun control bill is, does it protect your Second Amendment rights, your Fourth Amendment rights on search and seizure, and does it restrict the rights of law-abiding citizens? Now, I do believe when you break the law, you forfeit some of your rights. It might be the right to bear arms. It might be the right to vote. You harm a child, you lose your right to some sort of work conditions. And so in this red flag bill, my greatest concern is that it targets people who are identified that may hurt themselves and others. And in many times, these are people who have not committed a crime, they have not been convicted of a crime, so it's safe to say they may have a behavioral health or mental health issue. So to say to people who have a behavioral health or mental health issue, maybe it's a veteran, it's a law enforcement officer, it's a firefighter, an EMT, and they have been diagnosed with PTSD. Now they have been flagged as someone who could be at risk to harm themselves or others. I want to take this away, the stigma of people accessing behavioral mental health services. And I believe that some of these folks would be less likely to seek help if they thought it could result in them losing their right to bear arms without having committed a crime. And so the other part that concerns me is you may have an avid hunter and their daughter is struggling at school, and they may say to their counselor that they want to harm themselves. According to this red flag law, this young lady who does need help and who may actually be seeking to harm herself, her father has not broken a law. He's a law-abiding citizen. He may be even earn his wage as a guide or an outfitter, as lots of people do in my district. His firearms could be taken away from him. And yet, what statistics show is that women are they're least likely to harm themselves with a firearm. They use other methods. And
but
so
the statistics do show that women in domestic violence cases are harmed with firearms. That is something that folks are concerned about. So do you have any thoughts on that?
You're bringing that up. And so what does it look like?
We don't have much time left, but I'd like to hear what you...
Self-defense, absolutely. And although they could be harmed with that weapon, they can also protect themselves with a weapon. And so to take those firearms away from a woman, I mean, that household loses their firearms, which now that woman who may be at risk of being harmed by a domestic partner or whoever that abuser may be, it could be someone who's stalking them, and now we're taking away her right to protect herself. So that's my concern in this bill, is the due process, the search and seizure. I want to protect our law enforcement officers, and the sheriffs are really vocal, but I've also had police chiefs coming to me and saying, I think law enforcement officers are going to see a higher rate of incident that they're being harmed if they're being sent to take firearms away from a home.
Okay, Representative Dow, I want to thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on this legislative session and the issues that we face here in New Mexico. Unfortunately, we are out of time.
Well, thank you so much. That was the quickest 30 minutes of my life.
All right, well, thanks again. And we want to thank you for joining us for Your Legislators. I'm Anthony Moreno. We'll see you next time.